Who are you when the uniform comes off? It's a question I don't think many athletes ask themselves until they're forced to. Because when you've spent years waking up for practices, counting down to game days, and measuring your worth by how well you perform, it's easy to believe that that's all that you are. I know that because I lived it. Today, I want to talk about how cheerleading became my identity, how it unknowingly limited the expectations I had for myself, and how learning to look beyond the uniform completely changed the way that I see my future. Hi, everyone. Welcome back to Beyond the Uniform, the podcast where we talk about the person behind the athlete. I'm your host, Mackenzie, and if this is your first time listening, thank you so much for being here. This podcast was created because athletes spend so much of their lives learning how to perform for everyone else that sometimes we forget how to simply exist as ourselves. Whether you're currently playing a sport, recently graduated, recovering from an injury, or simply trying to figure out what's next in life, I hope every episode reminds you that your value has never depended on the uniform that you wear. Today's episode is probably one of the most personal ones I'll be recording because I'm going to share my own story. Not because I think it's unique, but because I know that many athletes are experiencing the same thing and can relate. Growing up, cheerleading was my everything. Every season had a goal. I always wanted to get to a new level. Every week had a practice. Every weekend had something to prepare for. My schedule revolved around cheer. My friendships revolved around cheer. Even the way I thought about myself revolved around cheer. And don't get me wrong, I loved it. Cheer taught me discipline, it taught me teamwork, it taught me resilience, it taught me how to push through difficult moments even when I didn't feel like I could. Those lessons are things that I will carry with me forever. But somewhere along the way, without even realizing it, I started believing cheerleading wasn't just something I did, it was who I was. And that's where things started to change. When somebody asked me about myself, the first thing I thought about was cheerleading. Hi, I'm Mackenzie Jinks. Yeah, I cheer at UTSA. Was my one-liner for ever for the past 3 years. When I thought about my future, I pictured cheer. When I imagined success, it was tied to performances, competitions. I never really stopped to ask what happens after this. Because as athletes, we're constantly changing our perspective and we're constantly chasing the next practice, the next competition, the next season, the next accomplishment. We become so focused on what's immediately ahead that we don't always build excitement for anything else. And honestly, that's a really scary place to be. The problem with only having one thing to look forward to. I don't think that anyone intentionally decides to let their sport become their identity, but it just happens. You spend thousands of hours training, your coaches become mentors, your teammates become family, your weekends disappear into competitions. Eventually, your entire routine is built around athletics, and before you know it, your sport isn't just a part of your life, it becomes your life. Then something happens. Maybe you graduate. Maybe you get injured. Maybe your season ends early. Maybe you don't make the team. Maybe life simply goes on. And why does that have to be the end all be all? Why suddenly is it that you don't know who you are anymore? That transition isn't something that we talk about nearly enough. I remember realizing that there were days when the only thing I was excited about was practice. If practice got canceled, my whole day felt ruined. If we had a bad performance, my confidence disappeared. If I was missing or messing up on a skill, I completely canceled anything that I was going to do outside of that, even if it meant schoolwork. The main reason and occasion and blessing of being here and gaining my education. Looking back, I realized I had accidentally given one activity complete control over all of my emotions, even the parts of me that made me mobile and able. I would let that take over my mind for not only minutes, not only hours, not only days, but weeks would jumble into one just because I couldn't get past the fog of feeling like all I was and all I was amounting to was what I was doing in my sport. And if that wasn't good, then so be it. The rest of my life was not good. So I think you can catch on to like what I'm trying to put down and how harmful this situation was for me. And eventually I asked myself something that completely shifted my perspective. What if there was more waiting for me outside of cheer? Now, I don't think that this is anything that any of us want to ask ourselves, especially when I had been cheering since I was 4 years old. This is something that I have waited for my entire life. This is something that I had worked for my entire life. But I ended up limiting myself to only being one big thing, only having one big goal in life. Yes, I had goals, and my comm degree was definitely not a waste. And I'm 100% still excited for what could be and what could maybe come of that in a later time in my life. Because I wanted to do sports broadcasting. And it's not to say that I'm not passionate about that anymore, but the only reason that I stopped myself there was because of the limits that I put on myself. The question that changed everything, which was, what if there was more waiting for me outside of cheer? Because I realized something after that. The limits that I thought existed were most likely the ones that I had created for myself. I had convinced myself that because I was a cheerleader, that was the lane I belonged in. But why? Who decided athletes can't also become healthcare professionals? Who decided athletes can't become entrepreneurs, teachers, musicians, business owners, content creators, researchers, parents, leaders? The truth is, being an athlete does not limit you. Sometimes your own mindset does. When I started exploring other interests, I discovered something I never expected. I actually fell in love with learning about healthcare. I became so interested in becoming a physician assistant. I enjoyed talking to patients during my clinical experiences. I loved learning new skills. I realized that my future could be so much bigger than I had imagined while I was only focused on cheer. And here's the crazy part. Discovering those new passions didn't make me love cheer any less. It simply reminded me that I was capable of being more than one thing. You know, once I started realizing that I could be more than a cheerleader, it almost felt really weird. No, it did feel really weird. Not because I didn't want to grow, but because I really didn't know how. When you ask yourself, or when you have spent years dedicating almost every day to one thing, it's hard to suddenly ask yourself, okay, what do I actually enjoy? I honestly had to relearn who I was. Maybe some of you listening to this can relate to that. And maybe you're in your sport right now and you think, no, this doesn't apply to me. Trust me, I used to think the exact same thing. I used to think that there was no beyond. But you get there. You get to the near end. You get to your third year and you're like, well, it's about to be my fourth year. What am I doing when I'm graduating? And do I want to be waiting around for a job that may never find me? Or a job that you don't feel necessarily prepared for? There were definitely a lot of things that went up into the air while choosing to not 100% buy into the whole sports broadcasting role. I really thought that cheer would help me all in all. And it definitely did. I have a real life passion for sports and just cheering people on. And when no one's watching, you don't need anything for it. And it's like your own personal bubble. It's amazing. I think sports are amazing. But I got down to the nitty gritty of it and I was like, is this going to provide me a job out of college? Am I prepared? Have I had enough internships? Can I have more internships? Because I was still in cheer at the time. And yes, it definitely opened doors. And I definitely love the athletic department, but I never even had the time to buy into myself. Now, this was me personally, and this is one of the reasons I wanted to even make this podcast, was just because you don't have to quit like I did. Time blocking is everything. Time management is everything. For me, in my certain circumstance, in my certain situation, that's what got me out. And if that's what needs to get you out and wake you up to what's next, then so be it. I'm grateful. I think everything happens for a reason. I think I wouldn't have half the opportunities that I have now for myself because I worked so hard this past year. But that's just a little bit of a backstory. So, like I was saying, when you think that no, this doesn't apply to me, trust me, I have been in those shoes and I always thought I would have another season. Another practice, another competition, another goal to chase. But eventually, every athlete reaches a point where something changes, whether it's graduation, an injury, simply growing into a new chapter of life. That's why I think it's so important to start discovering yourself before you're forced to. One thing that really helped me was trying new things without putting pressure on myself to be perfect. As athletes, we're used to being good at what we do, and we spent years practicing our skills. So when we try something new and we're not immediately great at it, it can be so frustrating. But growth does not happen when you're comfortable. For me, that meant focusing more on school. Sorry. I started thinking more seriously about my future in healthcare. The more I learned about becoming a physician assistant, the more excited I became. I mean, I'm telling you, I learned everything there was to know about anything: the patient care hours, the healthcare experience, the volunteer hours, the I'm like, of course I'm blanking, but I promise you, I know everything about everything. And I, even down to buying the physician assistant interview book and reading it from front to back and side to side because I am so passionate about this and excited about it. And for the first time in a long time, I had something to look forward to besides cheer. That was a really freeing feeling because suddenly, if cheer didn't go exactly how I wanted, my entire world did not fall apart. I still had other goals, other dreams, other reasons to get excited about waking up every morning. And I think that that's something that every athlete deserves. We should never put all of our happiness into one thing because life is so much bigger than one season. Something I realized was that I had been limiting myself without even noticing. Have you ever caught yourself saying, I'm just an athlete, or I've never been good at school, or I'm not creative? Sometimes we tell ourselves these stories for so long that they just start to feel true. But are they actually true? Or have we just repeated them long enough to believe them? I had convinced myself that because I had always been known as the cheerleader, that that's all that people would ever see me as, and that I was some type of failure for quitting to focus on school. But that wasn't true. People saw so much more in me than I even saw myself. Sometimes the person holding us back isn't a coach or a teammate or a parent. Sometimes it's us. Sometimes we're the ones settling limits on what we think we're capable of. And that's really hard to admit. It was really hard for me to admit. And it was really hard to set my ego aside and what was my passion for more than half of my life. to focus on something new. But it was also empowering because if we were the ones creating those limits, we're also the ones who can break through them. So I want to ask you something. If your sport disappeared tomorrow, who would you be? It's kind of a scary question, but it's an important one. Would you still know what makes you happy? Would you still have goals? Would you still know what kind of person you want to become? If the answer is I'm not really sure, that's 100% okay. That's actually where growth begins. You don't have to have your whole life figured out. I'm still figuring mine out too. But every day I try to remind myself that I'm building a life, my dream life, not just an athletic career. Because one day, whether we like it or not, our sport ends. But we don't. Our story keeps going. And honestly, I think that that's the most exciting part because there is so much to life waiting outside the uniform. You just had to be willing to find it. As we wrap up today's episode, I want to leave you with a few things that I wish someone had told me when I was younger. The first thing is don't wait until your sport ends to figure out who you are. I feel like I've said it before, but I'll say it again. Figure out what you like to do. Figure out who you want to be in this life. Are you okay with the slow life? Do you want to live in the country? Do you want to live in the city? What opportunities might open those futuristic goals for you in the end that you can work on now? What jobs can you apply to? What can you do to perfect your craft outside of your sport? And it's okay to love your sport. Honestly, I think it's amazing to have something that you are so passionate about. And I would never have learned the skills and the discipline and everything combined had I not been a cheerleader most of my life. But don't let it become the only thing that makes you excited to wake up every morning. Go try something new. Take a class that interests you. Volunteer somewhere. Read a book that has nothing to do with your sport. Atomic Habits, anything Mel Robbins, anything David Goggins, you will absolutely love because if you're an athlete, then I mean, he'll get you right in your in your set athletics, whatever you do. Yeah, so just be prepared for that change. But hang out with people who know you as more than just the athlete. These experiences don't take away from your athletic career. They actually make you a way more well-rounded person. And you need to be prepared for these interviews. I think that it's amazing that I was a cheerleader. And I will probably use this to the best of my abilities because, like it or not, like being a cheerleader taught me so much. I am a solid, obviously, performer, but I'm really good at, how do you say? I am really good at representing a company. I had to represent an entire university. And so I can promise you that they're looking for representatives. And if you were an athlete, then you better use that because you're dang good at it already. But those experiences don't take away from your athletic career. They actually make you a way more well-rounded person, like I said. The second thing I want you to remember is that your worth is not based on your performance. Okay? I know it's easier said than done because athletes are very competitive and we want to win. We want to improve. We want our coaches to be proud of us. But one bad game, one bad routine, one missed skill, or one mistake does not define who you are. You are still enough. You were enough before putting that performance on, and you will still be enough after it. The third thing is to stop putting limits on yourself. Looking back, I realized that the one thing that I was deciding, I realized I was the one deciding, what I could and couldn't become. I really never gave myself permission to dream outside of cheerleading. Once I did, everything changed. Now I'm working toward becoming a physician assistant and a goal that excites me just as much as cheer once did. It's proof that our passions can grow with us. They don't have to stay the same forever. And honestly, that's a beautiful thing. The fourth thing is to give yourself grace. Life doesn't always go according to plan. Sometimes you'll have setbacks. Sometimes you'll question yourself. Sometimes you are going to feel lost. And failing is a part of the process. Learn how to fail. Are you going to fail and be miserable for the next week? Or are you going to fail and you're going to get up the next day and you're going to try